It was a quiet autumn afternoon in the small town of Cedar Creek when 7-year-old Tommy wandered too far from his backyard, his curiosity leading him toward the old abandoned well on the outskirts of the dense forest behind his home. The well, once a crucial water source for the town, had been left uncovered and neglected for decades, its jagged stone walls concealed beneath thick, overgrown vegetation. Tommy, fascinated by a peculiar orange butterfly fluttering near the well's opening, stepped too close to the edge, his tiny foot dislodging a loose rock. In an instant, the ground beneath him crumbled, and with a piercing scream that echoed through the trees, he plummeted down into the dark abyss. His small body struck the rough walls as he tumbled, his fragile arms scraping against the jagged stones, before he landed with a bone-jarring splash into the cold, stagnant water at the bottom. The impact sent ripples across the surface, his panicked gasps swallowed by the eerie silence of the deep well. Dazed and disoriented, Tommy clawed at the slimy stone walls, his fingers slipping against the damp moss as he tried desperately to climb. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and mildew, the darkness pressing in around him like a suffocating shroud. Above, the sky was nothing more than a distant pinprick of light, taunting him with its unreachable warmth. His cries for help were swallowed by the depth of the well, the thick stone walls muting his feeble voice. Terror gripped his tiny chest, his heart pounding as the cold water reached his knees, soaking his jeans and sending shivers through his frail body. He screamed again, his voice hoarse with fear, but no one came. The world outside continued on, blissfully unaware of the child trapped below. As minutes stretched into agonizing hours, Tommy's sobs grew weaker, exhaustion creeping into his limbs. He pressed his back against the wall, trying to keep his trembling body above the rising water, his breath hitching in panicked gasps. His only company was the distant rustling of leaves above and the faint chirping of birds, their cheerful melodies a cruel contrast to his despair. The sky overhead darkened as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. Night was approaching, and with it, the terrifying unknown. Just as the last sliver of sunlight disappeared, a rustling sound near the well's opening caught Tommy's attention. His wide, tear-streaked eyes lifted toward the silhouette of a small figure peering down at him. A cat, its golden eyes reflecting the dim moonlight. It was a stray, a familiar sight in town, known for wandering the streets and evading human interaction. The cat tilted its head, its tail flicking as it observed the trapped child below. Tommy sniffled, his lips quivering. "Help," he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. The cat did not move, its gaze steady and unblinking. Then, without hesitation, it turned and disappeared into the night. Tommy's heart sank. He was alone again. But what he didn't know was that this stray cat was about to do something that no one, human or animal, had ever done before. It was going to save him. The stray cat, a scruffy orange tabby with matted fur and a limp in its left hind leg, darted through the darkened streets of Cedar Creek with a sense of urgency. Its paws barely made a sound against the cracked pavement as it weaved between garbage cans and abandoned wooden crates, its tail flicking with purpose. Unlike the other strays in town, this cat had always been different. It had never begged for food outside restaurants nor rummaged through trash bins. Instead, it observed the humans from a distance, taking note of their routines, their behaviors, their actions. And now, it knew exactly where to go. The cat sprinted toward the town's central square, where the evening stillness was broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl. There, sitting on a wooden bench beneath the glow of a flickering street lamp, was old Mr. Dawson, a retired firefighter known for his deep affection for animals. His gnarled hand stroked his long, graying beard as he tossed crumbs from a sandwich to a pair of pigeons pecking at his feet. The cat let out a sharp, insistent yowl, startling the birds into flight. Mr. Dawson looked up, his weathered face creasing in mild surprise. "Well, what's got you all riled up, fella?" he murmured. The cat meowed again, more urgently this time, pacing in quick circles before darting a few steps away and turning back expectantly. The old man frowned. He had seen this stray plenty of times before but had never seen it act so desperate. Something was wrong. Pushing himself up from the bench with a grunt, he adjusted his coat and followed the cat as it led him through the quiet streets, past shuttered storefronts and dimly lit porches. The cat moved with a frantic determination, glancing back every few seconds to ensure the old man was still behind. Mr. Dawson quickened his pace, a deep sense of unease settling in his gut. The cat led him beyond the last row of houses, toward the darkened edge of the forest where the trees loomed like silent sentinels. The old man hesitated for a moment. What could possibly be out here? But the cat's relentless urgency left no room for doubt. It weaved through the underbrush, its low meows echoing through the trees, until it reached the old well. Mr. Dawson stepped forward, peering over the edge, and his breath caught in his throat as he heard the faint, shuddering sob of a child. "Help!" Tommy whimpered, his voice raw from hours of crying. The old man's heart pounded. He fumbled for the flashlight in his pocket, flicking it on and shining the beam into the darkness. There, clinging desperately to the slippery wall, was the pale, tear-streaked face of a boy. "Dear Lord," Mr. Dawson gasped. Without hesitation, he pulled out his phone and dialed emergency services, his hands trembling. The cat, its golden eyes gleaming in the dim light, sat beside him, its tail curling around its paws as if it had known all along that this would work. And in that moment, Mr. Dawson realized that this stray cat had just done something truly unbelievable. It had saved a life. The frantic urgency in Mr. Dawson's voice carried through the phone as he relayed the dire situation to the emergency dispatcher. "A boy's trapped in an old well near the woods. He's cold, weak, and there's water rising down there. We need help now." His calloused fingers tightened around the device as he paced near the edge of the well, his flashlight beam trembling slightly as he angled it downward to keep Tommy in sight. The child's small frame quivered in the cold, his arms wrapped tightly around himself as he fought to stay upright in the knee-deep water. His wide, tear-streaked eyes clung to the dim light above, his lips trembling with the effort to stay awake. The cat, still seated beside Mr. Dawson, flicked its tail and let out a soft, urgent meow, as if pushing the old man to act faster. Mr. Dawson turned toward the darkened path, eyes scanning for any sign of help. Minutes stretched like hours, but then, sirens. Faint at first, the wailing sound grew louder, cutting through the stillness of the night. Flashing red and blue lights bathed the trees as a fire truck and 2 police cars skidded to a halt at the edge of the woods. Emergency personnel poured out, their boots crunching against the dry leaves as they hurried toward Mr. Dawson. "Down there," he called, pointing toward the well. The fire chief, a burly man with a streak of gray in his beard, took one look down and let out a sharp curse. "Get the ropes. We need a harness, now." He turned to one of his men. "How deep does this go?" "At least 30 feet, Chief," one firefighter answered, shining a powerful floodlight down the well. The moment the stronger light illuminated the space, the team saw just how bad it was. Tommy was shivering violently, his hands clutching the damp stone walls, his face pale with exhaustion. The radio on the fire chief's shoulder crackled as he relayed the update. "We've got a young boy, approximately 7 years old, stuck in a well. Water is present, and he's showing signs of hypothermia. We need a medical team on standby." One firefighter, already donning a harness, clipped himself onto the rope. "I'm going down." As they secured the line, the cat moved again, pacing anxiously beside the rescue team. It let out a low, insistent yowl, circling around Mr. Dawson's feet before darting back toward the fire truck. One of the officers, amused but curious, muttered, "That cat's been leading the way this whole time." Mr. Dawson nodded. "Smartest cat I've ever seen. If it weren't for him, we never would have found the boy." Below, Tommy's breathing had grown shallow. His eyelids drooped, and a weak whimper escaped his lips. "Stay awake, kid," the firefighter called as he descended. "We're coming for you." The boy barely responded. With precision and experience, the rescuer reached the bottom, water splashing as he stepped in. He secured the harness around Tommy's frail body, double-checking the straps before signaling to the team above. "He's in. Pull us up." The rope strained as the crew hoisted them, inch by inch, toward the surface. The cat watched intently, ears twitching as the heavy boots of firefighters shifted and braced against the ground. Slowly, the 2 figures emerged from the depths, first the firefighter, then Tommy, limp in his arms. The moment Tommy was laid onto the stretcher, paramedics swarmed, wrapping him in thermal blankets, checking his vitals, pressing an oxygen mask over his pale face. "We've got you, sweetheart," a medic murmured, brushing damp hair from his forehead. Mr. Dawson exhaled, relief crashing over him in waves. His eyes shifted to the cat, who, despite the commotion, sat calmly near the ambulance, its golden eyes locked onto the child, almost as if making sure the job was done. The fire chief clapped a hand on Mr. Dawson's shoulder. "If it weren't for you and that cat, we might not have found him in time." Mr. Dawson smiled, glancing back at the small feline. "That cat's the real hero." And as Tommy was lifted into the ambulance, the cat let out one final soft meow before turning away, slipping silently into the night, its mission complete. As the ambulance's rear doors slammed shut, its siren piercing the night, Mr. Dawson stood in the flickering red and blue glow, his heart still hammering from the tension of the rescue. He watched as the vehicle sped away toward Cedar Creek General Hospital, carrying little Tommy toward warmth, safety, and medical attention. The paramedics had reassured him. Tommy was cold and exhausted but stable. He would recover. Yet even as relief flooded through him, Mr. Dawson's gaze fell to the ground where the stray cat had been just moments ago. It was gone. He turned in slow circles, scanning the surrounding forest, the road leading back into town, the shadows stretching between the trees. No sign of the orange tabby. "Where'd it go?" a firefighter muttered, dusting dirt off his uniform. One of the police officers, arms folded, shrugged. "Guess it had places to be." A deep sense of curiosity, almost unease, settled in Mr. Dawson's chest. That cat hadn't just stumbled upon the well by chance, it had sought him out. It had known what to do. And now, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it had vanished. He let out a slow breath, shaking his head. Maybe some mysteries weren't meant to be solved. At the hospital. Meanwhile, at Cedar Creek General, nurses bustled around Tommy's hospital bed, adjusting his foredrip, taking vitals, and making sure he was wrapped tightly in warmed blankets. His mother, Sarah, sat at his bedside, her hands trembling as she brushed damp strands of hair from his forehead. "You scared me so bad, baby," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. I thought I'd lost you." Tommy, his eyelids heavy with exhaustion, managed a weak, sleepy smile. "The kitty saved me," he mumbled. Sarah blinked. "Kitty?" He nodded slowly, his small fingers curling into the blankets. "The orange cat. It found the firemen. It told them where I was." The nurse beside them smiled warmly. "I heard about that," she said, adjusting the heart monitor's readings. "Seems like that stray cat was looking out for you, sweetheart." Sarah frowned, glancing up. "Did someone bring it here? Did it belong to anyone?" The nurse shook her head. "No one's seen it since the rescue. Seems it just disappeared." Tommy, now drifting between wakefulness and sleep, whispered, "I hope he's okay." A town begins to wonder. News of the stray cat's heroics spread quickly through Cedar Creek. By morning, local newspapers carried the story, "Mystery Stray Saves Child from Certain Death," and "The Guardian Cat of Cedar Creek" were splashed across headlines. A local radio station dedicated a segment to the story, and online forums buzzed with speculation. Some believed it had once belonged to someone, perhaps a firefighter from long ago, drawn to the rescue by some deep, unexplainable instinct. Others said it was just an exceptionally smart stray, proving that animals had their own ways of communicating. A few leaned into the idea of the supernatural. Maybe it was a spirit, one caller suggested on a radio show. Animals sense things we don't. Maybe that cat wasn't just any cat. Maybe it was meant to be there. But for all the fascination and discussion, the cat itself was nowhere to be found. Mr. Dawson's search. Despite his initial acceptance that the cat had simply moved on, Mr. Dawson couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to find it. That it deserved more than just to be another stray slipping into the shadows, forgotten. So the day after the rescue, he set out into Cedar Creek streets, calling softly, shaking a small bag of dry cat food he had bought that morning. "Come on, fella," he murmured, scanning alleyways, peering beneath porches, checking all the usual hiding spots stray cats favored. "I know you're out here." Hours passed. No sign of the tabby. Disheartened, he finally sat down on a bench in the town square, rubbing his forehead. Maybe it really was just passing through. Maybe it had never meant to stay. Then, a sound. A soft, familiar meow. His head snapped up. There, sitting atop a wooden crate near the old general store, tail curled around its paws, golden eyes staring straight at him, was the cat. "Hey there, hero," Mr. Dawson said quietly, his voice laced with relief. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small piece of ham from his lunch sandwich. He set it on the ground, watching as the cat cautiously stepped forward, sniffed, and then took the offering. For the first time since he had seen it, the cat allowed him to reach out and gently scratch behind its ears. "Smart little thing," he muttered, stroking the matted fur. As if sensing something in his voice, the cat let out a slow purr, leaning ever so slightly into his touch. And in that moment, Mr. Dawson knew, this cat wasn't meant to disappear into the streets again. It had saved a child's life. It had done what no one else could. And now, it deserved a home. The morning air was crisp as Mr. Dawson sat on the bench, his hands resting on his knees as he studied the orange tabby in front of him. The cat, scruffy, thin, and clearly accustomed to the hard life of the streets, held his gaze, those golden eyes steady and unreadable. Even after everything, after leading the rescue and disappearing into the night, it had returned. But why? Mr. Dawson reached into his coat pocket, pulling out another small piece of ham. He set it down slowly, watching as the cat crept forward, sniffed the offering, then delicately took it between its teeth. The moment felt oddly profound. He had lived in Cedar Creek his whole life, seen stray animals come and go, but this was different. This cat had intelligence, an almost knowing presence, as if it understood the gravity of what had happened the night before. He exhaled. "You're coming with me." The cat blinked but didn't move. Mr. Dawson stood carefully, not wanting to startle the creature. "A hero like you shouldn't be wandering the streets." He bent down, extending his hand. For a moment, the cat hesitated, ears flicking back, muscles tensing as if ready to bolt. But then, after what felt like an eternity, it stepped forward, nuzzling its head against his fingers. A small, rumbling purr vibrated through its thin body. Mr. Dawson chuckled softly. "That's it, fella. Let's get you somewhere warm. A new home." It wasn't hard to get the cat to follow him home. He moved slowly, making sure not to rush it, allowing it to feel comfortable trailing just a few feet behind. As they left the town square and moved toward his modest house on the outskirts of Cedar Creek, he couldn't help but glance back every few steps, half expecting the cat to change its mind and dart away. But it never did. By the time they reached his porch, the cat hesitated at the bottom step, glancing up at the door. Mr. Dawson knelt. "Come on inside, hero. You deserve a warm bed." After another moment of consideration, the cat leaped up the steps and padded into the house as if it had lived there all along. The first thing Mr. Dawson did was grab an old towel and gently wipe away the dirt clinging to the cat's fur. It tolerated this with minimal fuss, only flicking its tail in mild annoyance. Next, he found an old ceramic bowl, filling it with fresh water and setting it beside a dish of canned tuna he had found in his pantry. The cat wasted no time devouring the meal. "You were hungry, huh?" Mr. Dawson murmured. As the cat ate, he sat back, studying it. It was thin but not starving, tough but not wild. Somewhere along the way, this cat had belonged to someone. Maybe not in recent years, but once. He could see it in the way it carried itself, the way it seemed to understand humans. When the meal was finished, the cat hopped onto the couch without invitation, curling up against one of the pillows. Mr. Dawson chuckled. "Making yourself at home already?" A slow blink. Another soft purr. Something inside him softened. For years, he had lived alone, content in his quiet routines. He hadn't expected to take in a stray. But this wasn't just any cat. "You need a name," he muttered, rubbing his chin. "Can't just keep calling you hero." The cat's golden eyes flicked toward him. After a moment of thought, he nodded to himself. "How about Lucky?" The cat didn't react. Or maybe Scout? A single ear twitched. Mr. Dawson exhaled, rubbing his temples. "You don't like either, huh?" He studied the orange fur, the way the cat carried itself. Strong, smart, independent. Then it hit him. Whiskers. The cat's tail flicked. Then, after a beat, it let out a small, approving meow. Mr. Dawson grinned. Whiskers it is. Meanwhile, at the hospital. Across town, Tommy stirred in his hospital bed. He had slept for most of the morning, exhaustion from the ordeal keeping him in a deep slumber. When he finally woke, his mother was sitting beside him, holding his small hand. "Morning, sweetheart," she said softly. Tommy blinked up at her. His voice was hoarse when he spoke. "The kitty. Is he okay?" Sarah exchanged a glance with the nurse standing nearby. "The kitty." "The orange one," Tommy whispered. "He saved me." His mother smoothed his hair. "I know, baby. And don't worry, he's safe. Mr. Dawson took him home." Tommy let out a relieved breath. A small smile played at his lips. "Good. He's a good kitty." The town's fascination grows. Over the next few days, the town of Cedar Creek couldn't stop talking about the stray cat that had saved a life. People who had never paid attention to the town's strays suddenly found themselves looking a little closer when they walked down the street. Children whispered about the magic rescue cat that had appeared out of nowhere. One local newspaper even published an article titled, "The Mysterious Hero Cat, Where Did It Come From?" Theories ran wild. Some claimed Whiskers had once belonged to a firefighter from decades ago, his instincts kicking in from some deep memory of past rescues. Others believed the cat was something more, something special, maybe even supernatural. But for Mr. Dawson, Whiskers was just a cat. A special cat, sure. A cat who had saved a life. But at the end of the day, he was just a scruffy, tough, street-smart tabby who had found himself a home. A special visit. A week after the rescue, Mr. Dawson was sitting on his porch, sipping his morning coffee, when he heard footsteps approaching. Looking up, he spotted Sarah and Tommy walking toward the house. Tommy, still pale but looking much stronger, was holding his mother's hand as they neared the porch. "Mr. Dawson," the boy called excitedly. "Is the kitty here?" Mr. Dawson chuckled. "He's inside. Hold on." He stepped into the house, calling, "Whiskers!" The cat lifted its head from its spot on the couch. With a stretch and a flick of its tail, it hopped down and padded toward the door. The moment Mr. Dawson opened it, Tommy's face lit up. "Kitty!" Whiskers trotted forward, his golden eyes fixed on Tommy. Then, in a rare moment of affection, the cat rubbed against the boy's legs, purring deeply. Sarah's hand flew to her chest. "Oh my gosh!" Tommy giggled, crouching to scratch behind Whiskers' ears. "I missed you, buddy." Mr. Dawson leaned against the railing, watching the exchange. "Seems he remembers you." Tommy beamed. "He was my hero." Whiskers let out a small, contented meow. And for the first time in a long time, Mr. Dawson realized his house, once so quiet, so still, felt full of life again. A cat that changed everything. As the days passed, Whiskers settled into his new home, no longer just a stray. He had a warm bed, regular meals, and a town that adored him. But more importantly, he had changed lives. Tommy's, Mr. Dawson's, and maybe even the entire town's. Because sometimes, heroes come in the most unexpected forms. Even in the shape of a scruffy, streetwise cat. The town rallies around Whiskers. The story of Whiskers spread far beyond Cedar Creek. At first, it was just local gossip, shopkeepers chatting about it over their morning coffee, parents telling their kids about the brave stray that saved a boy's life. But soon, it reached neighboring towns, then the county news, and within a week, Whiskers had become something of a legend. News stations began calling. A regional paper ran a headline, "Hero Cat Saves Trapped Boy, a Miracle in Cedar Creek." People started showing up at Mr. Dawson's house. At first, it was just curious neighbors, eager to see the famous cat. Then, it was reporters, flashing cameras and scribbling in notepads, asking questions about Whiskers' past. Questions that even Mr. Dawson didn't have answers to. A local animal shelter sent a representative to check on Whiskers, making sure he was in good health. "It's rare," the woman told Mr. Dawson, watching as Whiskers sat lazily on the porch railing, tail flicking. "For a stray to act with such intelligence, such intentionality. It's almost as if he knew exactly what he was doing." Mr. Dawson, arms crossed, simply nodded. He did. But the attention wasn't just from the press. Donations started pouring in for the town's small animal shelter, many of them in Whiskers' honor. A group of volunteers formed to help take care of Cedar Creek strays, feeding and finding homes for them. Someone even suggested putting up a small statue in Whiskers' likeness near the town square. Still, despite the growing attention, Whiskers remained indifferent to his newfound fame. While people came from all over to see him, he treated them all with the same mix of distant amusement and mild irritation. He had never been a people cat, and he wasn't about to start now. Mr. Dawson found the whole thing amusing. "You're the most famous cat in the county," he muttered one evening, scratching Whiskers behind the ears. "And you don't even care." The cat let out a long, slow blink before curling up beside him, completely unbothered. Tommy and Whiskers, a growing bond. Meanwhile, Tommy was recovering quickly. The doctor said he was lucky. The cold water at the bottom of the well could have sent him into shock, and the fall could have broken bones. But aside from a few scrapes and bruises, he was going to be just fine. His mother, however, wasn't so quick to recover from the scare. She watched him like a hawk, keeping him close, her eyes lingering on him every time he stepped outside. But Tommy didn't mind. He was just happy to be safe. And even more than that, he was happy that Whiskers was okay. A few days after getting out of the hospital, Tommy asked his mother if he could visit Mr. Dawson's house again. She hesitated at first, but eventually agreed, walking with him up to the old man's porch. Mr. Dawson greeted them with his usual gruff warmth. "Came to see your friend, huh?" Tommy nodded eagerly. "Is he here?" Mr. Dawson stepped aside, letting Tommy see the scruffy orange tabby curled up in a sunbeam on the windowsill. "Whiskers!" Tommy called excitedly. The cat's ear twitched, but he didn't move at first. Then, after a few moments, he stretched, yawned, and leapt down, trotting lazily toward the door. Tommy giggled as Whiskers rubbed against his legs. "He remembers me." Mr. Dawson chuckled. "Course he does. You're part of his story now." Tommy knelt, scratching the cat under his chin. "Thanks for saving me," he whispered. Whiskers simply purred. A town event in his honor. As the days passed, the town of Cedar Creek decided that Whiskers deserved more than just newspaper headlines and whispered stories. The mayor himself, an elderly man who had served the town for decades, called for a special event, Whiskers Appreciation Day. It started small, just an idea tossed around by the town council. But before long, local businesses offered to sponsor it, and soon it had grown into a full-blown festival. Banners were made, reading, "Thank you, Whiskers." A local bakery created special cat-shaped cookies for the event. The fire department, many of whom had been present during Tommy's rescue, offered to set up a demonstration for kids, teaching them about emergency safety. And at the center of it all was Whiskers himself. When the big day arrived, Mr. Dawson chuckled as he held up a small collar with a tag that read Hero. "Guess you gotta look the part, huh?" Whiskers swatted at the collar with a paw, unimpressed. "Well, just for today," Mr. Dawson relented, fastening it loosely around the cat's neck. "Let's go see your fans." The event was bigger than anyone expected. Hundreds of people showed up, some from Cedar Creek, others from surrounding towns. Children ran around with paper cat ears, and vendors sold t-shirts with Whiskers' face printed on them. Tommy was given a special seat next to Mr. Dawson during the ceremony. The mayor gave a speech about how acts of kindness, whether from people or animals, could inspire and change lives. Then, finally, he presented Mr. Dawson with a plaque that read, "In honor of Whiskers, the hero of Cedar Creek, a friend, a savior, a legend." The crowd erupted into cheers. Whiskers, sitting beside Mr. Dawson, let out a slow, bored yawn. Tommy giggled. "I don't think he likes being famous." Mr. Dawson laughed. "No, kid. I don't think he does." An unexpected offer. As the festival wound down and people began heading home, a woman approached Mr. Dawson. She was well-dressed, carrying a sleek black leather bag, and had the air of someone important. "Mr. Dawson?" she asked, offering a warm but professional smile. He raised an eyebrow. "That's me." She extended a hand. "My name's Laura Keaton. I work with a publishing company that specializes in children's books. I heard about Whisker's story and, well, I think it could make for something truly special. Mr. Dawson frowned. A book? A children's book, she clarified. A story about a brave little cat that saved a boy. I think it could inspire a lot of kids. Before Mr. Dawson could reply, Tommy tugged on his sleeve. Mr. Dawson, imagine a book about Whiskers. He looked down at the eager boy, then back at the woman. He glanced at Whiskers, who sat grooming himself, utterly uninterested in human affairs. After a long pause, he shrugged. Well, I suppose it wouldn't hurt to hear more. Laura grinned. Wonderful. I think Whisker's story is just getting started. As the sun set over Cedar Creek, Mr. Dawson couldn't help but shake his head. This scruffy, stubborn, one-of-a-kind cat had changed everything. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't done yet.